New York City. We all know it. It's a global capital, right? The center of finance, culture, you name it. But here's the crazy part. It's built on what should be an impossible geography, a scattered collection of islands. So to really get New York, you have to understand this 400-year story of relentless engineering, of destruction and constant reinvention, all just to tame this landscape. Let's dive into how this impossible city was built, torn down, and then built back up over and over again. And this image, wow, it just says it all, doesn't it? This is the whole story in one picture. On the left, that's Manhattan, which means a hilly island. It's what the Lenape people knew, a place full of forests and streams and marshes. And on the right, well, that's the city we know. The hills, gone. The streams, they're buried under the streets. The shoreline, totally artificial. This is a story about terraforming, about a place that is constantly breaking itself down just so it can build itself back up into something new. Okay, so where did this obsessive drive to completely reshape the land even come from? Well, the answer is baked right into the city's DNA. It was forged in the simple pursuit of profit and a fundamental clash of two totally different worldviews. You know, the root of it all was this basic disagreement over what land even is. For the Lenape, it was a shared resource, something you managed together for the community. But for the Dutch West India Company, nope, it was a commodity, something to be bought and sold. So that famous purchase of Manhattan in 1626, it wasn't a real estate deal. It was a massive, tragic misunderstanding. The Dutch thought they were buying property. The Lenape probably thought they were agreeing to a treaty to share the land. And that one single disconnect, it set the stage for everything that was to come. And this really gets to the heart of what New Amsterdam was, which is pretty much what New York still is. See, it wasn't founded for religious freedom like Boston was. It was basically a corporate office, a subsidiary. Its one and only goal was to make money. And that meant commerce was king, which led to this sort of grudging tolerance. As long as you were there to do business, they didn't really care what language you spoke or what god you prayed to. From day one, it was a global hub, always looking out at the world, not inward toward the rest of the continent. Fast forward about a century, and that whole profit-first mentality goes into overdrive. By 1811, the city was this messy, chaotic tangle of old streets. So what was the solution? One of the most audacious, radical acts of city planning in history. The commissioner's plan basically ignored everything about the island's natural landscape, the hills, the valleys, the streams, and just stamped a rigid, rational grid on top of it all. It was designed for one thing, and one thing only, to chop up the land of Manhattan into little, easy-to-sell rectangles to fuel a real estate boom. So the grid gives you the blueprint for expansion, right? But you still need an engine to power it. That engine was the Erie Canal. I mean, this thing was an absolute engineering marvel. It connected New York's amazing harbor directly to all the resources of the Midwest. It basically turned the Great Lakes into an extension of the Hudson River. Shipping costs dropped by more than 90%. And the result? New York became the gateway to America, no question. And as you can see on the timeline, just 10 years after the canal opened, the city blew past Philadelphia to become the nation's biggest city, and it's never looked back. But all of this explosive growth, yeah, it came at a huge cost. The city turned into a massive pressure cooker of incredible wealth right next to grinding poverty, with waves of new immigrants pouring in. All that led to some serious social friction and, eventually, incredibly violent conflict. This number right here, $300, it explains so much. During the Civil War, if you were a rich guy, you could pay $300 to get out of the draft. But if you were a working-class Irish immigrant, that was an entire year's salary. This blatant, in-your-face inequality, mixed with all these racial fears about freed slaves coming north to take jobs, just lit a match. The result was the 1863 Draft Riots, the deadliest civil uprising in American history, where mobs literally hunted Black people through the streets. So into this void, where the government was basically failing these new communities, who steps in? Well, this powerful and, yeah, deeply corrupt new force, Tammany Hall. It was a political machine, and it worked kind of like a primitive welfare state. It gave you immigrants what they were desperate for: a job, maybe a bag of coal for the winter, help if they got in trouble with the law, and in return, it got their vote. It was definitely corrupt, but you also have to admit, it was the system that integrated millions of people into American politics. You know, by the 1890s, when people said New York, they really just meant Manhattan and the Bronx. Brooklyn was its own huge city, the fourth largest in America. The push to merge all the boroughs into a greater New York was really intense. Supporters dreamed of this grand imperial city, but people in Brooklyn were not happy. They called it the Great Mistake because they were terrified of getting swallowed up by Manhattan. The vote was incredibly close, razor thin, but in 1898, the five-borough city we know today was born, basically overnight. All right, now we're jumping forward to the mid-20th century, and this is where we get a real battle for the city's soul. This whole period was defined by this titanic clash between two completely opposing visions for the future, a battle that nearly ended in total and complete collapse. So you've got these two titans, these two completely opposite visions. On one side, there's Robert Moses, the power broker. To him, the city was just a big engineering problem that he could solve with massive highways and giant housing projects, even if that meant bulldozing entire neighborhoods. And his opponent was Jane Jacobs, an activist and writer who saw the city as a living, breathing ecosystem. She argued it needed those messy, dense, lively streets to survive. Their battles were legendary, like when she successfully stopped his plan to ram an expressway right through Greenwich Village. That fight completely changed how we think about cities. But while all this is going on, this big philosophical fight about the soul of the city, there's a financial disaster brewing right under the surface. Just look at this chart. It's so clear. That red line, that's the city's spending. It's just taking off, pulling further and further away from the green line, which is its revenue. The city was borrowing money just to pay its daily bills. That is a one-way ticket to ruin, and it led directly to the fiscal crisis of 1975. And this was the breaking point. The banks finally cut the city off. The mayor went to Washington, begging for a federal bailout, and President Ford's answer was basically no. This iconic Daily News headline just captured the shock and the feeling of abandonment perfectly. New York was on its own, and it was forced into years and years of brutal, painful budget cuts. But here is the most incredible, ironic twist in this whole story. From the absolute ashes of this decay, this unbelievable cultural explosion just happens. In the burning South Bronx, hip-hop is born. In the grimy, gritty clubs of the Bowery, punk rock finds its voice. And in Midtown, disco offered this glittering, hedonistic escape. These movements changed global culture, and they grew directly out of the city's absolute darkest hour. It just proves its incredible capacity for reinvention. So that brings us to the modern era. And the story here is really all about the city's remarkable ability to absorb these devastating shocks, recover from them, and then adapt to totally new and profound challenges. I mean, if you remember the early 90s, the city's reputation was rough. Crime was through the roof. We're talking over 2,000 murders a year. But then the 90s saw this turnaround that was honestly nothing short of miraculous. Just look at this chart. The drop is staggering. Now, people still argue like crazy about why it happened. Was it new policing, the end of the crack epidemic, something else? But the result was undeniable. The city got safer, and it became a magnet for people and money once again. And that new resilience has been tested again and again and again in this century. The 9/11 attacks were an existential threat. A decade later, Hurricane Sandy showed just how vulnerable the city is to a changing climate. And then in 2020, the COVID pandemic just silenced the city completely. Each one of these crises forced New York to look in the mirror and figure out how to adapt. And one of the biggest challenges the city faces today is actually connected to a decision made way back during the crisis of the 1970s. New York City is legally required to provide shelter to anyone who asks for it. It's this unique mandate called the right to shelter. Well, today, that very promise is being pushed to its absolute limit by the arrival of tens of thousands of asylum seekers, and it's testing the city's very identity as a haven for all. So when you try to wrap your head around all of this history, all this change, there's one word that I think just nails it: a palimpsest. It's like an old scroll that's been written on and then scraped clean and then written on again. But no matter how many times you rewrite it, you can always see the ghosts of the old layers underneath. The Dutch focus on commerce, that rigid 1811 grid, the legacy of Tammany Hall. It's all still there. And that's really the engine of New York, isn't it? This constant cycle of creative destruction. It builds, it demolishes, and it reinvents. And that leaves us with one last, really fascinating question. As the city faces down these huge new challenges, climate change, affordability, a post-pandemic world, what parts of its past is it going to choose to erase? And what essential parts of its soul will it fight like hell to preserve?